Hey everybody, and welcome to start the 5th season of my nostalgic trip games here at FRGCB TV. This season, as you can see from the background here, I have finally got myself a green screen, which might look a bit different to what you're used to in the previous episodes, but hey, that's cool. And we're gonna start this season with something completely different, as we're running out of platforms that I actually have in my possession. So we're going to do something with emulation from this point on. But the main focus is still on real hardware, don't you worry about that. But this time we start with arcade games. And of course we're going to play through emulation, because I don't have any room in my house to actually have a bunch of arcade machines here. So let's start with 5 arcade games that I like to play every now and then through MAME, the Multiple Arcade Machine Emulator. Here we go.
I have very little of personal arcade gaming experience on actual arcade machines. Therefore, to compile a list of my real arcade gaming experiences would be a bit nonsensical, since there are only a handful of them. The first game I ever played on a proper arcade cabinet was Pole Position 2, which wasn't a particularly good experience. The next few weren't much better. The most memorable experience probably being Harley Davidson and the LA Riders from Sega 1997, which had a bike seat and handlebars, but the gameplay was atrocious. The first game that I had the chance to actually enjoy was Capcom's all-time favorite shooter, Commando, or Senjo no Okami by its original title. Unlike the other arcade experiences I had thus far, Commando was the first one I used money for more than 1 credit to play. That said, even with my vast experiences on both ZX Spectrum and Commodore 64, I was unable to pass the first stage then. And this was also 1997, around the same time I played the aforementioned Harley Davidson. Not until about 7 years after, when MAME started becoming good enough, I got interested in playing Commando as it was intended once again. The experience was nothing short of an eye-opener. The arcade Commando is, while much easier to handle than any of the home computer versions, also much more difficult unless you have access to the difficulty settings. But Commando is such a classic run-and-gun game that it requires no further introduction. It's not the first of its kind, but it is what made the genre flourish. It also spawned a sequel, which was called Mercs, outside of Japan, and Capcom's action platformer Bionic Commando is a spin-off, with the NES version featuring the Wolf of the Battlefield himself as a side character. But that's another story. Anyway, Commando has a comparison article on my blog, to which you can find a link below in the video description if you care to read. One of the only 2 arcade games that we have here in my hometown is a definite classic, and in this particular case is actually coupled with another such classic in a sort of an anniversary cabinet release. The games in the double feature cabinet are Miss Pac-Man and Galaga from Namco, but I will focus on Miss Pac-Man because that's what I'm more connected to for various reasons. From what I remember, Miss Pac-Man was probably the first game in the franchise that I was able to play on any platform that had the arcade conversion tolerably good. All of the ports of the original Pac-Man that I remember playing before that were more or less either bad clones or official ports that never really quite got there. But the main reason why Miss Pac-Man was the first game in the franchise that I got interested in was that for the first time, the mazes became different after a couple of stages, so there was some actual incentive to play further than just getting high scores. Having some animated intermissions to mark those occasions didn't hurt either. To me, Miss Pac-Man is definitely a step up from the original game, but you also have to have played the original game to appreciate the importance in the small steps in evolution here. Most of the games I like to play on MAME are games that never got converted for home computers or consoles, and Timber from the same people who brought you Tapper, has become one of my most revisited ones, even though I only got introduced to it through emulation. You play as a lumberjack who has to chop down a designated number of trees for each level within a time limit, while dodging wasp nests thrown by angry bears. Like in Tapper, you get a bonus level after every couple of regular levels, which in this case is a log rolling event. Similarly to Tapper, the graphics are funny and cartoony, the sounds complement the graphics, and the gameplay is as sharp as your axe, with chopping buttons for both sides. Unlike Tapper though, Timber has a cooperative 2-player mode, which makes all the difference. Timber was my first finding of an arcade-exclusive game some 20 years ago, and I still enjoy it as much as I did then. I guess you can call it nostalgic already. Then of course we have to have Pong on the list. And there's not really much to say about Pong, apart from the difficulty in getting to play it properly. See, the problem is there's no proper way to play the original Pong as it was intended, unless you actually have a proper Pong table. You can't even play it on MAME, nor has there ever been a good emulator of the original Pong on PC or any console, until the fairly recent inclusion of the game in a compilation called Atari Volt, available for most modern gaming platforms, which is the closest to the original that I have. Well, actually, I do have a Pong clone, which is a German thing with many different game variations, but the controllers are analog joysticks, which don't feel natural enough for what Pong requires, and the picture quality is dubious at best. But here's some unemulated gameplay footage of the German Pong clone, with some variations included in the machine. If you want to have a next best thing as an old school experience, Atari released a game called Video Olympics for the Atari 2600, which features 50 Pong variants and is played with paddle controllers. Still, I'd recommend Atari Volt if you can't afford a real Pong, because a mouse is more reliable than a paddle, which can get jittery in time. I'll end this episode with a game I could have easily put on almost any other nostalgia trip list, but the cold hard fact is that Bobble, in its original arcade form, is unbeatable. Like Commando and Pong, it really doesn't need further introduction, perhaps for even better reasons, since Bobble is still alive and kicking on modern platforms. But the original game is a classic for good reasons. 100 levels of excellent level design, many different enemies that behave differently, nice difficulty progression, tons of things to collect for scoring, upgrading your skills and warping levels and so on. With a friend to play the other Dragon Cub, Bobble is simply one of the best cooperative arcade games of all time. Another great reason for Bobble's long-lasting status is an odd one, which I hadn't really thought about properly until one of my old friends pointed out some years ago. You cannot fall into a random pit and die from that in Bobble. You just fall back from the ceiling in the level. You don't have to make any guesses where to jump and fear that you'll die from something you can't see. Any death that occurs in Bobble happens due to reasons, all of which are very much visible. If you enjoy Bobble on any computer or console, it won't come as much of a surprise. But if you haven't had the chance to do so yet, try to find the original arcade version in some format. It's definitely worth making the comparison to your favorite home conversions. I would say the best official chance is to track down a copy of Title Legends on PlayStation 2, Xbox or Windows.